The room fell silent the moment Damien Blackwell entered. Polished floors reflected his Italian leather shoes as he walked with measured precision, his presence slicing through the tension like a knife. Wall Street's god in a charcoal suit, immaculate, calculated, unreadable. His assistants trailed behind, silent and tense, clutching tablets like shields. The boardroom was already in a panic. "Mr. Blackwell," one of the board members started, eyes darting to the headline plastered across the wall-mounted screen. Breaking: Billion-dollar empire Blackwell Industries linked to fraud, exploitation by Eyes Wide Investigation. Damien didn't flinch. He took his seat at the head of the long glass table, steepling his fingers. The room reeked of sweat and fear. "Speak," he said simply. "Investor confidence has dropped 30% overnight," muttered Langston, his CFO. Social media's lit up with calls to boycott. The non-profit, Eyes Wide, they've leaked everything. Offshore tax havens. Unsafe factories in Bangladesh. Ghost contracts. And Damien asked coldly. Langston hesitated. "The press is naming you." A faint twitch in Damien's jaw. "Of course they are. That's the story they want, the monster in the suit." He stood and walked slowly toward the screen, his reflection merging with the headline. It was a smear, sure. But it wasn't all lies. And behind that headline was a name, Lila Monroe. She was everywhere this morning, being hailed as the people's hero. Radiant, sharp, disgustingly self-righteous. The founder of Eyes Wide, and the woman who just sent his company into a death spiral. He'd seen her face for the first time on the leaked video, wind catching her hair as she stood in front of one of his warehouses in Detroit, eyes blazing, pointing at a camera like she was delivering a verdict to the world. "We will not let greed bury the truth. Blackwell Industries cannot hide anymore." She spoke like a woman on fire. And yet all Damien saw was someone who didn't understand what she'd done. He looked back at his boardroom, disgusted. Let them run. The cowards always do when the boat rocks. Langston wiped his brow. "The SEC is opening an inquiry." Damien's lips curved upward, mirthless. "Let them come." He walked out, phone already ringing, his mind spinning faster than the stock ticker outside his office window. Lila Monroe leaned over a cup of black coffee in her modest office, walls cluttered with protest art, staff members buzzing in excitement. The exposé had dropped at midnight. By morning, Eyes Wide had become a movement. "You did it, Lila," her assistant beamed. "The Blackwell story's gone viral. You've already been invited on 3 talk shows." Lila didn't smile. She stared at her laptop screen, at the same headline the rest of the world was celebrating. Buried beneath the victory was an ache she couldn't ignore. An anonymous worker had emailed her hours ago, "We've all been laid off." Was this worth it? She'd exposed corruption, but what about the people crushed beneath the fallout? Her fingers hovered over her keyboard, unsure. "We're changing the world," her assistant said again. Lila finally looked up. "Yeah," she whispered. "I just hope it's for the better." Damien stood alone in his office, the Manhattan skyline stretching behind him, steel and smoke and silence. His empire, his identity, was unraveling, and he knew exactly where to start. "Get me Lila Monroe," he told his assistant. Damien stood frozen in the shadows of his office, the only light coming from the glowing ticker crawling along the bottom of the massive wall-mounted screen. Images of him, smirking, suited, powerful, flashed between talking heads dissecting his fall. Former Wall Street golden boy Damien Blackwell is under fire after allegations surfaced linking his company to international labor abuse and tax fraud. The remote snapped in half between his fingers. He tossed the broken plastic onto the floor, chest rising with slow, deliberate breaths. Rage pulsed beneath his skin like a second heartbeat. He'd built Blackwell Industries from the dust of his father's debts. Every deal, every sleepless night, every ruthless choice, it had all led here. And now the vultures were circling. He turned toward the glass wall overlooking Manhattan. It was raining now, hard, as if the city itself was washing him out of its memory. Behind him, the door creaked open. "Sir," his assistant whispered, visibly trembling. Another investor just pulled out. That's the 6th today. We're hemorrhaging. I'm aware, Damien said tightly. The assistant lingered. And the board, they've called an emergency meeting. They want accountability. Some are saying, step down. The silence that followed was deadly. Damien turned, slowly, until his full gaze bore into the trembling man's face. Tell them I built this empire with blood and brilliance. If they want to gut it, they'll have to drag me out by my throat. The assistant bolted. Left alone again, Damien clenched his jaw. The headline still flickered. Lila Monroe, founder of Eyes Wide, exposes corruption at Blackwell Industries. He could see her face in his mind again. Bright eyes, that maddening steadiness in her voice. She thought she'd won. But all she'd done was draw first blood. The cameras clicked wildly as Lila stepped out of the rideshare and into the bright morning light. A wave of reporters surged forward, mics outstretched. Lila, do you feel vindicated today? How does it feel to be the woman who brought down Blackwell? Do you have a message for Damien Blackwell? She gave a polite smile, but kept walking, her heels clicking faster on the sidewalk. Inside the office, she shut the door behind her and leaned back against it, heart pounding. Her assistant beamed from behind her desk. We just passed 5 million views on the exposé. Donations are pouring in. And we've had 8 offers to speak at global conferences. Lila nodded, but her throat felt tight. She stepped into her office, shut the door, and collapsed into the chair. Her laptop was open, emails flooding in from across the world. Praise. Admiration. Applause. And then, I worked 20 years at that factory. Now we're all unemployed. What are we supposed to do, Ms. Monroe? Her chest squeezed. Another message. My mom was crying all morning. Blackwell's was the only job she had. You called it justice. How is this justice? She pressed a hand to her forehead. They were right. Her investigation had unearthed rot, but the explosion had buried the innocent too. She hadn't meant for this. She hadn't foreseen the scope. But maybe she should have. The knock came just as her vision blurred. Lila? Her assistant peeked in. You're trending again. You want me to draft a statement? No, she said quietly. Not yet. She looked down at her desk, where a printed magazine cover had been left. Her face. Bold letters. The woman who humbled a titan. Lila picked it up and slowly tore it in half. The board members argued, shouting over each other. We're imploding. He knew about the factories. He didn't stop it. Damien stood at the end of the long table, silent, watching them unravel like hyenas over scraps. Enough, he said, voice sharp as a blade. The room fell still. You think I don't know what this looks like? His eyes flicked from one man to the next. But make no mistake. I am the only reason this company still breathes. A beat of silence. Then, and what's your plan, Damien? One of them sneered. To call the woman who burned you and beg? A small, cold smile touched his lips. Something like that. Across town, Lila's phone buzzed again. A message. From Damien Blackwell. Let's talk. You owe me that much. She stared at it, fingers trembling, and slowly typed back. Tomorrow. 1 hour. You get 10 minutes. The late afternoon sun bled orange across the city skyline as Lila reread Damien's message on her phone. Tomorrow. 1 hour. You get 10 minutes. She hadn't answered again. And she hadn't expected him to come to her. So when her assistant rushed into the room, breathless and wide-eyed, Lila barely looked up from the papers scattered across her desk. Lila. He's here. Who? A shadow moved behind the frosted glass wall. You know who. The door pushed open with a controlled force, and in walked Damien Blackwell, tall, tailored, and carrying a storm beneath his calm exterior. His eyes, sharp and dark like obsidian, scanned the room before landing on her. You didn't respond. Lila rose slowly from her chair. I didn't think you'd need a written invitation to barge in. He closed the door behind him with a quiet click. I'm not here for pleasantries. No kidding, she muttered. The air thickened instantly, the silence swelling with things unsaid. Damien's gaze swept across her office. Photos of field workers she'd helped, awards, and the framed front page of the exposé that had gutted him. Her name had become his ruin. You look pleased with yourself, he said, his voice low and bitter. I'm not, she replied without blinking. I didn't come after you. I came after the truth. The truth? He scoffed. You destroyed thousands of jobs and humiliated me in front of the entire world, and you're hiding behind some shiny concept of truth? She stepped closer, the fire in her chest rising. Don't mistake me for someone who enjoys collateral damage, Damien. I've read the letters. I know people are hurting. But I didn't forge fake audits. I didn't cut costs with slave wages. I didn't build a billion-dollar empire on exploitation. You did. He flinched, just slightly. Enough to show her she'd struck something real beneath the armor. You could have called. Asked for clarification. But no, your team set fire to everything. My name is dirt. My company's bleeding. Do you even care what that means? Lila exhaled, slower this time. No, she said quietly. I care what it meant, to the women locked in warehouses with no pay, to the kids in factories without shoes. You lost everything because you refused to look beyond your bank account. Damien's jaw tightened, but his shoulders sagged, just enough for her to notice the desperation behind the fury. I didn't know, he said finally, the words cracking in his throat. I trusted the wrong people. I looked the other way because it was easier. Because I thought that's what leaders do. For profit, she said. For survival, he snapped. There's a difference. They stood there, eye to eye, rage and exhaustion dueling between them. And something else. Something dangerously close to recognition. Lila crossed her arms. So, what now? You came here to scream at me? Get closure. No, he said. A long silence stretched between them. I came to make you a deal. Her brows lifted. You think I'm going to help you? He stepped closer, dropping the mask of arrogance. You care about the people who lost their jobs. I do too, believe it or not. And if I can rebuild, do it right this time, they might get a second chance. But I can't do that alone. The board won't listen. The investors have vanished. And you, his voice hardened again, you're the one person they trust now. Lila stared at him. You want me to save your company? I want you to help me rebuild it, ethically, transparently, publicly, the same way you destroyed it. The absurdity of it nearly made her laugh. But his expression wasn't arrogant anymore. It was haunted. I don't trust you, she said. Neither do I, he replied. Silence pulsed between them. Finally, she walked back to her desk, pulled out a folder, and set it down in front of him. You'll agree to full oversight. No decisions without review. I'll have veto power on hiring, contracts, everything. His eyes flicked down at the folder. You had this ready? No. But I hoped you'd crawl in, eventually. His smile was bitter. Still smug. Her eyes narrowed. Still corrupt. He picked up the folder, thumbed through the pages. Then looked up. Fine. She extended her hand across the desk. Deal. He stared at it, and slowly took it, their hands clasped, for the first time. Fire and ice. And just before he let go, he murmured, There's one condition. What? We're getting engaged. She blinked. Excuse me. Fake engagement. Public. Clean PR. You help me fix my image. I help you prove reform is possible. You get your non-profit support. I get investors back. You want me to lie to the world, she said, voice rising. To play house with the man I exposed? His smile returned, wolfish now. You already burned my empire, Lila. Might as well dance on the ashes. Lila yanked her hand away. And for the first time since he'd walked into the room, she didn't know if she was more afraid of him, or what this dangerous game might awaken in her. Lila stared at the folder still lying between them. Her heart hadn't slowed since Damien's last words. We're getting engaged. It wasn't a question. It was a power play dressed in expensive charm. The kind of proposition only a man like Damien Blackwell could deliver. Sharp, smug, and wrapped in just enough logic to make you question your sanity. She finally spoke, her voice flat. Tell me you're joking. Damien didn't blink. Do I look like a man who jokes? She didn't respond. Because no, he didn't. He looked like a man who could calculate global fallout while sipping bourbon. A man who could smile in a boardroom as kingdoms crumbled under his feet. And right now, he was offering her a throne, one built on lies and leverage. You really think I'm going to parade around with you on my arm like some PR Barbie? She snapped. No, he said smoothly. I think you're going to do it because it'll save your non-profit. That stopped her. I've read your reports, Lila. You're outgrowing your donations. Your reach is wide but underfunded. This exposé brought attention, but not sustainable money. You need big donors now. Corporate backers. You think this charade is the solution? I think we both have something the other needs, he said. You need legitimacy. I need redemption. A fake engagement makes us look like a partnership, a united front for change. Public perception shifts. Investors return. Your charity thrives. My company survives. Everybody wins. Except the truth, she muttered. He shrugged. The truth is messy. People prefer stories. Lila turned away, pacing the room now. Her thoughts spun. Images of the workers she fought for. The doors slammed in her face by old money donors. The long nights trying to keep her team paid. She hated him. But she hated losing more. This wouldn't be forever, she said cautiously, turning back to him. No, Damien replied. A few months. Enough to stabilize everything. Maybe even enjoy the press tour. She rolled her eyes. You're delusional. You're desperate, he countered, stepping forward. And brilliant. Which is why you know this is the smartest move. Silence fell again. Then, slowly, Lila exhaled and crossed to her desk. She opened a drawer, pulled out a crisp legal pad, and wrote something at the top. Terms of engagement. Damien watched with quiet amusement as she scribbled. You're actually doing it, he said. She didn't look up. I'm setting rules. Break even one of them, and I'll sink you again, this time without mercy. His grin widened. God, you're intoxicating when you threaten me. She glared. Rule 1. No physical contact unless required. Rule 2. You follow my script at every event. Rule 3. He held up a finger. Rule 3. Try not to fall in love with me. The pen froze in her hand. She looked up slowly, searching his face for sarcasm. There was some, but beneath it, something darker. A flicker of vulnerability he quickly masked. Lila set the pen down and folded her arms. You're unbelievable. Damien leaned across the desk, just enough to close the space. You're agreeing to fake love, Lila. Don't act shocked when it starts to feel real. Her breath caught, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she took the notepad, tore off the first sheet, and handed it to him. You'll sign this. I will, he said, eyes locked with hers. And we make the announcement tomorrow. Done. She nodded once, decisive and cold. Then get out of my office. He turned without protest, walking to the door like a man already in control. But just before stepping out, he paused. Wear red tomorrow, he said without turning back. It suits the fire you breathe. The door clicked shut behind him. Lila stood frozen, paper still in her hand, heart pounding harder than she liked. Fake engagement. A man she loathed. A stage built on lies. What the hell had she just signed up for? And why, in that moment, did it already feel far more dangerous than anything she'd exposed before? Lila turned to the window, staring out at the city she'd once fought to protect. Tomorrow, the world would see a power couple forged in deception. But only she knew the truth. She was already losing control. The camera flash was blinding, but Lila smiled anyway, tight, polished, and professional. Damien's arm slipped around her waist like it belonged there. It didn't. They stood on the steps of the Astoria Foundation, shoulder to shoulder beneath the massive white banner that read, "Rebirth Through Responsibility. A Blackwell and Eyes Wide Initiative." Click. Another flash. Damien leaned in. "Try not to look like you're being held hostage," he whispered through his smile. She turned her face to his, grinning with fake affection. "Try not to look like you're enjoying this so much." Then came the cue from the photographer. Now, one for the lifestyle pages. Something romantic. Before she could move, Damien dipped his head and kissed her. She froze for half a second, his mouth brushing hers, warm and deliberate. Not rushed. Not mechanical. For the cameras. But it didn't feel like acting. She pressed her hand against his chest, lightly, and pulled back just enough to keep the illusion intact. "Good," the photographer called out. "That's the money shot." She stepped away quickly, fixing her hair, ignoring the way her skin burned beneath her coat. Damien straightened his cuffs, calm as ever, as if he hadn't just shifted something between them without warning. "You kissed me," she hissed. "It's called commitment to the role," he said coolly. "You could have warned me." "I could have. But it wouldn't have looked as real." She hated that he was right. She hated even more that her heart was still racing. Over the next week, they became inseparable in the eyes of the media. There were more photo shoots. More galas. Hand-holding. Posed whispers. Matching designer outfits courtesy of a stylist Damien insisted on. "Brand consistency," he explained with that maddening smirk. Behind closed doors, it was anything but romantic. "Absolutely not," Lila snapped, slamming the proposal packet onto the table. Damien didn't flinch. "Why?" "Because your idea of philanthropy is a tax loophole. I'm not signing off on some shallow PR stunt disguised as charity." He crossed his arms. "It's a luxury scholarship program for tech interns. For students from elite private schools. That's not outreach, that's grooming your next board member." He exhaled slowly. "You want impact. I want optics. Find a way to give me both." "You're impossible." He leaned in. "And yet, you agreed to marry me. Fake or not." Their fights were frequent, intellectual sparring matches, sharp and sometimes too personal. But under the tension, something else simmered. A pull. The night that changed things started simply. They had just left a silent auction downtown. Damien had been his usual self, charming in public, dismissive in private. Lila had endured the event with a practiced smile and a steady glass of champagne. Now they were walking back to the car, her heels clicking against the sidewalk. Damien was half a step ahead when she paused. Across the street, a homeless man sat curled against a store wall, cardboard sign propped against his knees. "Anything helps." "Hold on," Lila said, reaching into her bag. But before she could cross, Damien was already moving. She watched, confused, as he strode to the man, knelt down, and without a word, unstrapped the silver watch from his wrist. A Rolex. Limited edition. Easily worth 20 grand. He placed it in the man's hands. "Not showy. Not loud." "Sell it," Damien said softly. "Tonight. Don't let anyone talk you into keeping it." The man looked up, stunned. "Why?" Damien's gaze didn't waver. "Because tomorrow, someone else will take it from you." Then he stood and walked away, like it hadn't happened. Lila just stood there, watching him. Watching that version of him. When he reached her again, she said nothing. Not in the car. Not in the elevator. Not when they stepped into the penthouse. But the silence between them had shifted. Like something had cracked open, quietly, irreversibly. He poured himself a drink, and without looking at her said, "Say it." "Say what?" she asked. "That I surprised you." "You didn't," she lied. He turned slowly. "You keep thinking I'm a villain in your story, Lila. Maybe I am. But you're not the only one who cares about the people out there." She didn't respond. She didn't know how. Instead, she stepped closer, curious despite herself. "Why'd you really give him the watch?" she asked. Damien took a sip of scotch, gaze unreadable. "Because I used to be him." The air shifted. Lila blinked, something tightening in her chest. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, his phone rang. He glanced down, froze, and slowly, his expression hardened. Lila's heartbeat quickened. "What is it?" He looked at her, eyes suddenly sharp. "We have a problem." The fake engagement was becoming too real. And now, whatever came next, wouldn't be part of the plan. Lila sat in the penthouse kitchen, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass, staring into the swirling liquid. She hadn't heard from Damien for hours after the phone call. Every time she thought about asking, she hesitated. Something in the pit of her stomach told her this was bigger than a mere PR problem. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows gave her a perfect glimpse of the city, its lights twinkling in the distance. But the glow didn't help ease the tension in her chest. Damien was changing, and so was she, whether she wanted it or not. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her non-profit team, confirming another round of meetings for the upcoming charity event. She responded quickly, trying to keep herself occupied, but her mind kept drifting back to Damien. His sudden mood shift. His unspoken words. There was a knock on the door. She stood quickly, her heart racing. "Damien." She opened it to find not Damien, but Carter Langston, Damien's older mentor, the man who had helped him rise from nothing to one of the wealthiest and most influential figures in the world. Carter's sharp blue eyes regarded her with that same calculated smile, the kind that made you feel like you were a mere piece on his chessboard. "Lila," he greeted, his tone dripping with false warmth. "What do you want, Carter?" she asked, stepping aside to let him in, though her instincts screamed to slam the door in his face. He walked in as if he owned the place, surveying the modern decor with detached interest. "I was hoping we could have a conversation about the future." "The future of what, exactly?" "Damien's company." He turned to face her, his smile never faltering. "And your non-profit. The two are more connected than you might think." She narrowed her eyes. "I'm not here to talk about that." He chuckled darkly. "No, of course not. You never do you? Always the righteous martyr, focused on saving the world." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "But tell me, Lila, how do you think your little exposé is going to end up? If Damien crumbles under pressure, so does your credibility. You've made an enemy of the wrong person." Her chest tightened. She'd known Carter was dangerous, but hearing him speak with such icy certainty made her pulse race. "You're threatening me," he smirked. "I'm warning you. Stay out of this. Damien's not your fight." Before she could respond, Carter's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and then back at her. "That's all for now. Just think about it." With that, he turned and left, his presence hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Lila stood frozen for a moment, her pulse quickening. Carter wasn't the only one manipulating things behind the scenes. There was something deeper here, something more sinister than just a business rivalry. Later that evening, Lila found herself at the top of the building's staircase. Her mind kept circling back to what Carter had said. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling her, something far darker than business politics. Damien's earlier actions had felt like a slip-up, a crack in his carefully constructed facade. She could still remember the way he looked at the homeless man, the gentleness in his expression that had made her question everything she thought she knew about him. But now, as she stared out the window into the city's sprawling chaos, it hit her, Damien's calm detachment wasn't just arrogance. It was a shield. A way to protect himself from the chaos he'd grown up with. A noise from behind her made her jump. She turned, only to find Damien standing in the doorway. His posture was rigid, his jaw set in that familiar icy way, but there was a deep weariness behind his eyes. He wasn't himself tonight. "Damien?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped into the room and shut the door behind him with a soft click. His eyes met hers, and for a fleeting second, Lila saw something other than the confident billionaire, the man who had been manipulating everyone around him for years. It was the man who had been broken. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, his voice hoarse. "For everything. For how I've treated you." Lila blinked. "What are you talking about?" He took a slow step closer, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and something darker. "I wasn't always this cold. I didn't used to think the way I do. But when you grow up in a place like I did, you either survive or you get eaten alive." Lila's heart twisted. She had heard whispers about his past, about his mother, who had died young, protecting people she loved. But hearing it from him, it was different. Raw. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know it was like that." Damien let out a bitter laugh. "No one does. Not unless they've seen it up close." He paused, his expression turning cold again, almost like he was trying to block out the vulnerability he'd just let slip. "But it doesn't matter. What matters is what's happening now. The investors are starting to question me, and Carter. Carter's planning something. I don't know what yet, but he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants." A shiver ran through her. What does he want? Damien's eyes darkened. "Everything. My company. My legacy. And if he gets it, you'll be collateral damage. Your non-profit, your reputation, it will all be destroyed." Lila's heart hammered in her chest. "We have to stop him." Damien took a deep breath, his eyes flashing with something dangerous. "You're in deeper than you realize, Lila. This isn't just about business. It's personal now." She stepped closer. "Then we fight back. Together." He didn't answer right away. He just stared at her, his eyes searching, as if trying to figure out if he could trust her. And in that moment, Lila realized something. She wasn't just in this to stop a scandal. She was in it for him, too. The man who was both the villain and the victim. The man who had fought for everything, but at a cost he'd never shared. But as the seconds ticked by, the weight of what they were about to face settled over them both. Damien's phone buzzed again, and this time, it wasn't Carter. It was worse. It was an alert from his company. Blackwell's assets attacked. Imminent crisis. Damien's face turned white. The battle had just begun. The storm was relentless. It hit without warning, as if the sky itself had decided to rip apart in a sudden show of fury. Lila stood by the large windows of the retreat's guest suite, watching the rain lash against the glass, blurring the world outside into a sheet of silver. The wind howled, rattling the walls, making the room feel smaller, more confined. She had arrived at the retreat for a weekend of networking, of ethical business leaders, finding common ground and discussing how to save their companies from the kind of scandal that had been hanging over Blackwell Enterprises. But now, with the storm making the roads impassable, the retreat was a farce, a prison of polished smiles and whispered judgments. And then there was Damien. He stood a few feet away, his arms crossed as he looked at the storm, but she could see the tension in his posture. She could see how his jaw tightened every time a loud crack of thunder shook the room. It was as if he was trying to hold himself together, piece by piece, but the weight of everything was breaking through. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Lila asked, breaking the silence. She didn't mean to sound too probing, but she had been watching him all evening, watching him withdraw deeper into himself. He turned, meeting her gaze for a moment. His eyes were stormy, much like the weather outside. "Just trying to figure out how I'm going to get out of this mess," he said quietly. "I'm stuck between my mentor's betrayal and my company's collapse." "You think it's easy being in charge," Lila wasn't sure how to respond. She wasn't a businessman. She didn't know how to fix the weight of a corporation on someone's shoulders, nor did she know what it was like to be under constant scrutiny. But she understood what it was like to feel suffocated by expectations, to be trapped in a role that didn't fit. "I get it," she said after a beat. "The pressure. But you don't have to shoulder it alone." He let out a sharp breath. "I'm used to it." His voice softened, though, as he looked at her again. "I didn't ask for help, and I'm not sure I want it." The room felt colder. Lila wondered if it was the storm outside, or if it was just the wall between them thickening. She had thought maybe, just maybe, they were starting to connect on some level. But Damien had always kept himself distant, reserved. And despite everything, he still didn't trust her. A crack of thunder rolled through the room, louder than before, and Lila flinched. The lights flickered and then went out, plunging them into darkness. "Great," she muttered under her breath, reaching for the nearest lamp to turn it on. "You okay?" Damien's voice was closer now, his concern evident in the way his words softened. "I'm fine," she replied, though she could feel her heart racing from the unexpected shock. She glanced at him, trying to catch her breath, but the storm was making everything feel heightened. The air, thick with tension, pressed in on her. Then, the door swung open, and the hotel manager appeared in the doorway. "I'm afraid all the other rooms are booked, and the storm's too bad to drive anywhere," he explained, his face apologetic. "You two will need to share a room for the night." Lila's eyes widened. "What? No. The storm's bad enough that no one can leave until it clears," the manager interrupted gently. "I'll leave you two to settle in. Just let me know if you need anything." And with that, he left, closing the door behind him. Lila turned to Damien, her heart pounding. "This is insane," she muttered, running a hand through her hair. Damien didn't say anything at first. He simply walked across the room and grabbed his phone, his face lit up by the screen as he checked for updates. But when he put it down, his eyes lingered on her, just a little longer than usual. There was a flicker of something there. Something he wasn't letting himself show. Lila cleared her throat. "I guess we don't have much of a choice." "No," Damien replied, his voice almost too soft. "Guess we don't." The air between them was thick with the tension of being forced into a space where neither one of them felt comfortable. There was no way out of this. No way to escape the proximity. They stood there for a long moment, in the quiet, the storm pounding relentlessly outside, before Lila spoke again. "Let's just make the best of it," she said, forcing a smile. "We're both adults, right?" Damien nodded, though he didn't meet her gaze. "Sure." They moved to the bed, both unsure of how to navigate the uncomfortable silence that followed. There was only one bed, and both of them seemed hesitant to break the tension that had been building ever since their forced proximity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of shuffling and awkward movements, they settled in. The sheets were cool against her skin, but Lila could feel the heat radiating from Damien, just inches away. The rain outside beat down harder, and the wind howled through the cracks of the windows, filling the room with a wild, unrestrained noise. But it was the silence between them that felt louder. And then, it happened. Damien shifted, his fingers brushing hers accidentally at first. The contact was electric, sending a jolt of something unfamiliar through Lila's body. She pulled her hand back quickly, but before she could say anything, his fingers reached for hers again, this time intentionally. He didn't look at her, just held her hand in his thumb grazing over her knuckles with a tenderness that made her heart skip. She could feel the warmth of his touch spreading up her arm, and her breath caught in her throat. "Damien," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward her, the soft light from the window casting shadows over his face. He leaned in slowly, his breath warm against her cheek. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. And when his lips touched hers, it wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't for anyone but them. The kiss was slow at first, tentative, like two people unsure of whether they were making the right choice. But as the minutes passed, it deepened, turning more urgent, as if the storm outside wasn't the only thing raging. But then, just as quickly as it had started, Damien pulled back, his breathing ragged. He looked at her with a mixture of guilt and something she couldn't quite place. "Lila, we can't." Before he could finish, the door swung open again. The manager stood in the doorway, eyes wide with surprise. "I forgot to mention the storms caused some structural damage. There's no way to leave tonight." Lila's heart pounded, her pulse racing, but her mind was caught in a whirlwind of thoughts she couldn't fully grasp. Damien's expression, unreadable, met hers for a long moment. And in that moment, Lila realized they were about to be trapped, not just by the storm, but by what they were becoming. The city buzzed beneath them, the streets alive with the chaos that never seemed to stop. New York was always a pulse, a rhythm that moved too fast for anyone to truly keep up with. But in the quiet of the apartment, Lila found herself staring out at the skyline, her mind racing just as much as the traffic below. The engagement was becoming more than just an act. She could feel it in every glance, every touch that lingered too long. Even when they were surrounded by the noise of business and press, it was impossible to ignore the undercurrent between them. She had always been in control, always careful, always calculated, but now, with Damien, she felt something slipping. Something dangerous. "Lila." Damien's voice broke through her thoughts, his tone low and almost hesitant. He stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning her face. "We need to talk." She straightened, forcing a smile as she turned to face him. "About what?" He took a step into the room, his expression unreadable. The storm had passed, but the tension between them lingered like the heavy humidity after a rainstorm. "The deal I just canceled," he said, his voice sharp. "It was going to ruin a lot of people. And I just couldn't go through with it." Lila frowned, surprised. "The exploitative merger with that tech company? You really walked away from that?" Damien nodded. "I did. I didn't want to be that guy anymore. The guy who used people for profit." Lila was silent for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she processed his words. He was changing, and she didn't know whether it was a good thing or not. "I didn't know you had it in you," she said quietly. His lips quirked into a half-smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Neither did I." Lila's heart pounded a little faster, a pang of something unfamiliar twisting inside her. She didn't know what it was, relief, maybe, or something closer to longing, but it was there, and it made her uncomfortable. "What are you really saying, Damien?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Why did you cancel it? It's not like you to back down from something that big." Damien's gaze flickered to the window, his face hardening again. "Maybe I'm not the person I thought I was." She studied him, her mind working to make sense of the shift. There was something raw in his tone, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. She had always seen him as a man who controlled everything, his company, his image, his emotions. But now, there was an openness she didn't know how to handle. Lila took a deep breath and stepped toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not alone in this, you know. You don't have to do it all by yourself." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something dangerous. Something that could set them both on fire. "I know," he murmured. "But I'm not sure if I can trust anyone. Especially not you." The words hit her like a slap, and she flinched instinctively. She knew what he was getting at. He feared getting too close, feared her power, her independence. He didn't want to need her, because if he did, it would make everything so much harder. "I'm not here to hurt you, Damien," Lila said, her voice firm, though her chest tightened with something she couldn't name. "But I can't promise I won't change things. I'm not the woman you think I am." Damien didn't respond right away, his gaze drifting away from hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "I know. But that's what scares me." There was a moment of silence between them, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Lila wanted to reach out, to close the distance that felt too wide now. But she held back, unsure of what to do with the feelings that had been growing between them. Damien's voice broke the silence again, quieter this time, almost as if he was speaking to himself. I'm afraid of falling in love with you, Lila. And I'm afraid of what it might do to me. Her breath hitched at the words, the truth of them sinking deep. She had been so focused on protecting herself from him, from getting too close, that she hadn't considered the possibility that he might feel the same way. That he might be afraid of her in ways she couldn't understand. But then, almost as if he realized what he had said, Damien took a step back, his expression hardening again. He cleared his throat, his voice taking on that familiar, guarded edge. But it doesn't matter. We have a deal. We do this, and we stick to the plan. Lila stared at him, torn between the raw honesty of his confession and the walls he was trying to rebuild around himself. Right, she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. We stick to the plan. But as she turned away from him, her heart raced in her chest, a mix of longing and fear swirling inside her. She didn't want to admit it, but she was falling for him. Fast. And it scared her more than anything. The soft hum of Lila's phone startled her as it buzzed across the table. She had just stepped out of her meeting with a potential investor, her mind still spinning with numbers and projections when the notification flashed across the screen. Breaking news. Engagement of Lila Hartley and Damien King exposed as a fraud. Her hand froze. For a moment, everything in the world stopped. Her chest tightened, and she clicked the headline, her eyes scanning the article, her stomach sinking deeper with every word. Carter Langston. The story broke wide open. The engagement, the charity galas, the photo shoots, the kiss for the cameras, everything had been orchestrated to boost their image, not just Damien's company, but hers as well. The words rang in her ears like 1,000 drums. Fake romance. Exploitation. Lies. Lila stood, her legs unsteady, as if the floor beneath her was shifting. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Everything she had worked for, everything she had trusted, was falling apart in front of her eyes. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Her phone buzzed again. Damien's name flashed across the screen, and something inside her snapped. Without thinking, she swiped to answer, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound composed. What the hell is this, Damien? She spat into the phone, her words sharp, cutting through the air like daggers. Is this how you repay me? After everything we've done, you let him expose this? There was a long pause. Lila's breath was shallow, her hands trembling as she gripped the phone tighter. She could hear him on the other end, but he said nothing. Silence. Complete silence. Damien! She hissed, her heart pounding in her chest. You used me. Just like you used everyone else. You. No, his voice finally broke through, rough, strained, almost too soft. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Lila's hands shook with rage. Then how did it happen, Damien? How did it go from something real to this mockery? Another pause. She waited, desperate for an explanation. But nothing came. No justification, no defense. Just silence. She slammed the phone down, the click of the call ending ringing in her ears like a final verdict. She sank into the nearest chair, her hands clenched into fists, trying to breathe through the sharp, stabbing pain that gnawed at her chest. Her mind raced. How could he? How could he let Carter destroy everything? Everything she'd worked so hard for? Lila's non-profit was already under attack. Donors were pulling out, calling it a sham, a cynical move to boost her personal brand. The comments were harsh, cruel. Words like manipulation and fraudulent flooded the media. The money, the donations, were drying up. She could feel her empire slipping through her fingers, the weight of it crushing her. But what hurt the most was the betrayal. The lies. The false intimacy. The years she had spent pretending they weren't just actors on a stage, when in fact, she had been playing her role, and playing it well. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor with a harsh sound. Her reflection in the window stared back at her, a woman who had built so much, only to have it all come crumbling down. She didn't know what hurt more, the destruction of her career or the fact that she had allowed herself to believe in something that wasn't real. The knock on the door startled her, pulling her from her thoughts. Lila didn't even wait to hear it again before she stalked toward the door, opening it without care for who might be on the other side. Damien stood there, his face drawn and tired, the lines of stress and regret marking his features. His jaw was tight, and his eyes, dark, almost pleading, met hers. She felt a rush of anger, like fire licking at her veins. "I don't want to see you. Not now. Not ever again." His eyes hardened. "Lila, let me explain." "I don't need you to explain anything," she shot back, her voice cutting through the air between them. "You let Carter destroy everything. You lied to me. You lied to all of them." Damien took a step forward, his hands raised slightly in an attempt to calm her, to bridge the gap that felt like an ocean now. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. I didn't want this to happen." Lila scoffed, bitter humor rising in her chest. "Oh, really? Because it sure looks like it was all part of your plan." Her voice cracked with the weight of all the emotions swirling within her. "I trusted you. I believed you. And this is what you've done to me." His gaze shifted downward, and Lila saw the rawness in his face, the guilt, the struggle to keep his composure. But it was too late. She took a step back, her breath shallow. "You've already ruined everything. You've ruined me." "Lila, please," Damien whispered, desperation creeping into his voice. "I never meant for this to happen. It's not what you think." She looked at him, her chest tightening with every word that went unsaid, with every possibility of what could have been. She wanted to believe him. But the trust was shattered. She couldn't see past the anger, past the hurt. She stepped back, her heart pounding. "Just go." For a long moment, Damien stood there, silent, his eyes never leaving her face. And then, as if a weight had descended upon him, he finally turned, his steps slow and heavy as he walked away. The door clicked shut behind him, and Lila collapsed against it, her body racked with emotion. She wanted to scream, to let the anger pour out of her. But all she could do was sit in the quiet aftermath of the betrayal, the echo of his absence the loudest thing in the room. The room was suffocating. Damien stood backstage, staring at the row of cameras lined up in front of the press conference podium. The buzz of conversation and the flashes of cameras outside the curtain only amplified the weight pressing down on him. He could hear the murmurs, whispers of his betrayal, his lies, his manipulation. The reporters, the public, they all wanted blood, and he was their target. Behind him, Carter Langston stood, the smirk never leaving his face. He had orchestrated everything, pushing the fake engagement story into the public eye, making sure it blew up in the worst possible way. He'd set Damien up perfectly, and now he stood by, ready to watch him burn. Damien's fingers tightened around the microphone, his mind racing. He could play along. He could throw Lila under the bus, let the blame fall on her. He could save his company, protect his empire, and salvage the little bit of credibility that was left. It would be easy, too easy. Carter would make sure it all blew over, and he would come out on top, no one any the wiser. But then, Damien's thoughts drifted to her, Lila. The hurt in her eyes when she'd slammed the door in his face, the betrayal she must have felt, the pain she was still carrying. He couldn't do it. He couldn't stand there and lie anymore. The decision hit him like a ton of bricks. The weight of the truth was too much to bear, but it was the only way forward. If he wanted to fix this, if he wanted to salvage any shred of decency, he had to do what he should have done from the start. Come clean. "Damien," Carter's voice interrupted his thoughts, cold and insistent. "Don't do this. You can still fix it. You just have to blame her, and everything goes back to normal." Damien didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on the podium. Carter's manipulation, his smooth words, they didn't matter anymore. "I'm not going to blame her," Damien said quietly, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around him. "I'm going to tell the truth." He stepped forward, his hand shaking slightly as he adjusted the microphone. The buzz in the room quieted immediately, all attention snapping to him as he moved into the spotlight. Cameras flashed, the eyes of the world on him. And then, the silence. He could feel the weight of their expectation, the hunger for a confession. The tension was palpable, like the whole room was holding its breath. Damien's throat tightened, and for a moment, his resolve wavered. He almost stepped back, almost let Carter's words swallow him. But then he remembered the pain in Lila's eyes. The way she had trusted him. He couldn't let her be the scapegoat. Not now. He cleared his throat, the first words coming out in a rush. It started as a lie. The cameras clicked, and the room shifted. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters leaned forward, their pens poised. Damien's heart hammered in his chest, his voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the air like a knife. But somewhere between fighting and pretending, I fell in love with her. There was a moment of stunned silence. The world seemed to freeze. Damien's chest ached, the words tasting like salt on a wound. He could feel his eyes sting, the raw emotion overwhelming him. But he couldn't stop now. I fell in love with her, he repeated, louder this time, more sure of himself. And I am sorry. Sorry for the lies, for the manipulation, for everything. His hand was trembling at his side, his breath ragged. I never meant to hurt anyone. I never meant for any of this to get out of hand. But I can't keep hiding behind a mask. I can't keep lying to all of you. His gaze flickered briefly to Carter, who stood at the back of the room, seething with fury. Damien swallowed, pushing past the bitterness in his throat. The engagement was fake, yes. But my feelings for her, they're real. And I won't let anyone tear that apart, not even if it costs me everything. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, knowing that everything was on the line. The company, his career, his reputation, all of it hung in the balance. But in that moment, nothing else mattered but the truth. And Lila. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said, his voice breaking as he tried to hold it together. I'm just asking for a chance to make things right. The room was eerily quiet as the reporters processed his words. Then, a sudden surge of noise, questions firing from every angle. But Damien didn't hear them. His gaze remained fixed on the door, on the empty space where Lila should have been, where she had once stood by his side. The camera flashes felt like 1,000 daggers, but in that moment, Damien didn't care. All that mattered was the weight of his decision. The truth had finally spilled out, and there was no taking it back. As the reporters crowded around, demanding answers, Damien's mind was elsewhere, lost in the memory of Lila's face, her tear-filled eyes. He had chosen love. But would she ever believe him? The press conference spiraled into chaos, but Damien barely noticed. His heart pounded in his chest as he waited, desperate for a sign that Lila was listening, desperate for her to hear his truth. The courtroom was a flurry of activity, the air thick with tension as Carter Langston stood in front of the judge. His once confident demeanor had crumbled, his eyes flickering between the sea of reporters and the stern faces of law enforcement. The truth had come out. Carter had been the mastermind behind the scandal, pulling the strings to sabotage Damien's company and destroy Lila's non-profit in one fell swoop. Damien sat in the back of the courtroom, watching as Carter was handcuffed and led away, his arrogance wiped clean from his face. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold. This moment, the culmination of everything that had happened, felt like the end of a chapter, and the beginning of something new. Outside the courthouse, the world was buzzing. The headlines were shifting. No longer was Damien the villain. Carter's name was on the front page. The truth of his betrayal splashed across the newspapers like wildfire. And for the first time in months, Damien could breathe, the weight on his chest lightening just a little. But as the chaos swirled around him, one thing remained painfully clear. He wasn't in this alone. Lila. She had been by his side through every twist, every turn. Even when it seemed like the world had turned its back on him, Lila had stood firm. They had both been bruised, broken, and betrayed. But now, they were standing here together, facing the wreckage of everything they'd built. And somehow, they had survived it. Damien found her later that evening, in the quiet of the office they had once shared, now stripped of its former grandeur. She was sitting by the window, her eyes fixed on the city below, lost in thought. The soft glow of the streetlights cast a warm halo around her, and for a brief moment, he was reminded of the woman he had fallen for, the woman who had cared more about the people than the profit, the woman who had made him believe in something more than himself. He stood in the doorway, unsure if she had heard him approach. His heart was pounding in his chest, but this time it wasn't fear, it was hope. Hope that, despite everything that had happened, they could still find a way forward. Together. "I don't want to rebuild alone," Damien said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I want to rebuild with you." Lila turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. Her expression was unreadable, but Damien could see the flicker of vulnerability there, just beneath the surface. She didn't speak at first, and for a moment, all they did was stand there, staring at each other. The silence stretched on, thick with the weight of everything unsaid. But then, without a word, Lila stood up, crossing the room toward him. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Every step she took felt like an eternity, each heartbeat louder than the last. And then, when she reached him, she simply placed her hand on his chest. "I've been angry," Lila finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Angry that you didn't tell me. Angry that you didn't trust me with the truth. But I see you now. I see the man who was willing to destroy everything to make things right. And that's what matters." Damien's breath caught in his throat. Her words were like a balm to his wounded heart, and he found himself leaning into her touch, unable to hold back the surge of emotion that flooded through him. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice thick with regret. "I should have told you. I should have trusted you." Lila didn't reply immediately. Instead, she cupped his face in her hands, her gaze soft but steady. The warmth of her touch, the gentleness in her eyes, it all felt so right. "I'm not forgiving you because you fixed everything," she said quietly, her fingers tracing his jawline. "I'm forgiving you because you're willing to. And that's what counts." The words hit him like a wave, washing away the last of his doubts. They weren't perfect, and neither was their love, but in that moment, Damien knew he had a chance to make things right, not just for himself, but for them. "Then, let's do this," he said, his voice cracking slightly, but filled with conviction. "Let's rebuild. Together." Lila nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Together." Damien reached for her, pulling her into an embrace. He held her close, the familiar warmth of her body a reminder of everything they had been through, and everything they still had to face. There was no grand gesture, no perfect solution. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like they were finally on the same side, fighting for the same thing. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the world outside seemed to fade away. Everything was uncertain, but the one thing Damien knew for sure was that, with Lila by his side, he could face whatever came next. And as he whispered into her hair, the weight of the world lifting, he understood. It wasn't just about rebuilding a company or a reputation. It was about rebuilding trust, rebuilding love, rebuilding them. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. The world felt lighter now, different, somehow, than it had before. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer held them in place. Time had a way of healing wounds, of erasing the sharp edges of old pain, leaving only the smoother contours of what remained. And what remained between Lila and Damien was something more real than any of the carefully constructed lies they had once lived by. They were no longer pretending. Their days were filled with travel and purpose, with building schools and launching mentorship programs that empowered young entrepreneurs across the globe. It was work that mattered, work that made them feel like they were finally making a difference in the world. And as they moved from one country to the next, from one project to another, it became clear that the love they had built wasn't just for show, wasn't just a fleeting thing born out of a contract. It was real. It had roots now, deep enough to survive whatever storms life threw their way. Tonight, though, there was no whirlwind of activity. No press conferences. No bustling crowds. No deadlines to meet. Just them. It was quiet on the rooftop where they stood, the cool evening air wrapping around them like a soft blanket. The city stretched below, a sea of lights flickering in the distance, the hum of life continuing below them while they stood above it all. The world was moving, but up here, with the weight of everything behind them, they felt suspended in a moment of calm. Lila leaned against the edge of the rooftop, her eyes on the horizon. The first hints of dawn were creeping across the sky, the darkness giving way to the faintest glow of orange and pink. It reminded her of the first time she had stood in this place with Damien. How far they had come since that night of pain and betrayal. How far they had come since they first began to trust each other. Damien stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, yet still distant in his own quiet contemplation. There was something peaceful in the way he held himself now, no longer the brash CEO or the man who had kept everyone at arm's length. Now, there was only the man who had faced his own flaws, his own demons, and was still standing beside her. For the first time in months, Lila felt like she could breathe without the heavy weight of doubt pressing down on her chest. She turned to him, catching his eye. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a quiet acknowledgement that their journey together had been one of growth, struggle, and ultimately, love. Damien took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. He didn't speak at first, just held her gaze with those familiar, steady eyes. And then, in the soft light of the breaking day, he spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper against the breeze. "I hated you once," he said, the words slipping out like a confession, "because you made me see myself. All the parts of me I didn't want to face. All the parts one hated." Lila's heart skipped a beat, her grip tightening on his hand. She wasn't surprised by the honesty in his voice. She had come to expect it from him, the rawness of his admissions. But hearing it again, feeling the weight of it, made her stomach turn with both a lingering ache and a fierce kind of love. Damien's expression softened, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "But now I love you because you never stopped seeing me. Even when I couldn't see myself." There was a silence between them, but it was different than the one before. This silence was filled with everything they had been through, everything they had fought for. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words ever could. Lila's breath caught in her throat, and she felt a warmth bloom inside her chest. She had always known that Damien's love wasn't easy, that it came with scars and lessons learned the hard way. But it was hers. It was real. And for all the mistakes they had made along the way, they had somehow found each other in the end. "I never stopped seeing you," Lila said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Even when you couldn't see yourself, I could see you. All of you. And that's what matters." The first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, casting the world in golden light. It was beautiful, this moment, as the city below them began to stir with the new day. But up here, on this rooftop, in this quiet space between them, time seemed to stand still. And for once, everything felt right. Damien pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her as they watched the sun rise together. There was no need for more words. They didn't need to say everything out loud anymore. They had found their peace. But as they stood there, wrapped in the calm of the morning, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. They had fought for their love. They had earned this moment of quiet. But life, as always, was unpredictable, and the future was never certain. Still, for now, all that mattered was that they were together. No longer pretending, no longer hiding. Just two people who had fought through the darkness to find the light. And as the sun rose higher, casting its warm glow on their faces, Lila knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together.